Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Onyegolu. Now, it's one of the most contentious debates in American politics, the right of women to have an abortion. For nearly 50 years, that constitutional right was upheld by perhaps the best-known Supreme Court ruling, Roe versus Wade. But that right is under threat from anti-abortion campaigners and their supporters in state legislatures in many parts of the United States. And they've scored a major victory in Texas, where state legislators approved a new law effectively banning almost all abortions. Well, the crisis has deepened following a decision by the Supreme Court not to block the legislation. Campaigners say the law will force women to cross state lines to access terminations, and the Biden White House is furious, saying it undermines women's constitutional rights enshrined in the landmark Roe versus Wade ruling. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by Arise correspondent Itoro Udofia. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. So the U.S. Supreme Court votes not to act on an emergency request to block that new Texas law on abortion. Tell us more about this and about the issue, because it's been simmering for some years now, hasn't it?
Yes, it has been, and it's definitely reached a boiling point now. So what has happened is that basically this Texas law bans abortions for 6 weeks, and this is usually when women have no idea if they're pregnant or not. And this has now become effectively the law of the state. So what this means is that the U.S. Supreme Court basically decided to not intervene. It was voting for a non-intervention. And I just want to name one reason they cited in a statement as to why they decided not to intervene on this issue. And one of the reasons was that it ruled it was too soon for the abortion advocacy groups to bring their challenge against the law. And it said it was unclear as to whether or not the defendants named in the lawsuit would enforce the Texas legislation in effect. And I bring this up just because to say there's a tension of time with this particular measure, because what happens when a woman who needs an abortion now has to wait on the timetable of the U.S. court or the possibility of potentially being sued. And many activists consider this law to be one of the most strictest in the nation, abortion laws. And the other striking thing about the abortion law is that it also provides citizens the right to sue abortion providers.
Absolutely, I was reading that. Yes, and I understand that lawyers for abortion providers in Texas, are still hoping that the Supreme Court may act today or later this week. But they're not required to respond by a certain time, are they? That's the Supreme Court. So it's unclear what will happen, but until then, this law remains pretty much in effect, doesn't it?
Yes, and again, this is about time, and unfortunately, the time is not in favor of the clinics, it's not in favor of abortion rights activists, and it's not in favor of those in need of this procedure, in need of abortions. So the legal challenges are ongoing, and one of the brighter notes to all of this is that organizations, people are fighting this, and this is also bringing about many conversations that probably need to be had again around the right to for a woman to choose. And it's interesting because while this is happening on the ground, what's happening is that service providers are being effectively surveilled. So Whole Woman's Health, which is a clinic in Texas, they have 4 clinics. So they've said that right now they've had people surveil them, anti-abortion rights activists surveilling them and calling the police already since this ruling has happened.
Extraordinary, isn't it? And how comprehensive a ban is this? What exactly is the law stating? I know you mentioned a bit of it, but just expand a bit on it. What is it saying with regard to women and abortions?
Well, again, the fact is that it's not about it being a comprehensive law, because the thing is that it's not very comprehensive. basically the state is also not intervening. It's given it to private citizens to handle, and that's the trick in this law.
Right.
And the other thing too is that it's changed the playing field. So before, an abortion rights activist could have a legal route of actually challenging this in the courts. But how can you challenge something when it depends on a private citizen suing you? You have to wait. So there's a waiting game here. So that's what people are saying, that there's really not much to go on this law. And that's why the US Supreme Court also, in a way, voted for non-intervention, because it's saying it's not clear yet. We'll have to see how this develops.
That's a very interesting point there. And I noticed that, I mean, apart from the people who are protesting on the streets, both President Biden and Vice President Harris have waded into the controversy. I mean, is that likely to make any difference, or is it pretty much in the hands of the courts, basically?
It's in the hands of the courts. I mean, we'll have to see what happens. The US Supreme Court, they're still waiting to see, again, how this develops, how they vote. If they vote in the line of compassion with this particular issue, we'll see. But there is something about, especially Kamala Harris speaking about this as a woman of color, as the first VP of the US, and coming out and saying that this is not okay and this could severely hurt people. And the people we need to name are people of color, lower income people, and people who can't afford or don't have the time to go out of state to get these procedures done.
And somebody's been speaking about this, have they?
Yes, we have White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki speaking about this.
President's focus is to reiterate our deep commitment to the constitutional right, of course, established by Roe v. Wade nearly 5 decades ago, and to continue to call for the codification of Roe. This is not the first threat to Roe we've seen in a state across the country. It's an extreme threat. And again, I would just note, this is offering up to $10,000 to individuals who report someone who is going to get an abortion. I mean, that is what we're talking about.
We see what's happening there, and she's basically reiterating what Kamala Harris, the VP of the US, has said, what Biden has said as well, that this is not right, and they're figuring out how to deal with this constitutionally.
And does the Supreme Court's lack of action kind of speak volumes and signals that they're more likely to overturn or act, or at least chip away at Roe versus Wade? And this is the start of the unraveling of that, 50 years of abortion rights precedent, basically.
Well, there is that adage that actions speak louder than words. And if we were to see what's happening in Texas and also what's happening in other states, you could definitely argue that Roe versus Wade is being steadily chipped away. So Texas now has become an important state to watch, to see what happens, to see how abortion rights activists respond, how those in government respond, but also how everyday citizens respond.
And of course, the U.S. The U.S. Supreme Court at the moment is weighted in the direction of the conservatives, isn't it?
I would say for now, for sure, it definitely is, and we'll see again what develops. I mean, the beautiful thing about this is that it always happens on the ground in terms of how people organize and also decide to respond. So we'll see the kind of conversations that develop, and hopefully this will push for a great policy change.
But I mean, there are people who don't agree with abortions, but who say that in the case of things like sexual assault, for instance, rape and that sort of thing, abortion should be allowed. I mean, why is it that those who've passed this law in Texas have even prevented that?
Well, it gets to that, the core argument in abortion, pro-choice or pro-life. And Texas Governor Greg Abbott also said while signing this legislation into effect that in Texas we work to save lives. And that's exactly what this Texas legislature has worked to do. So that's what it's about for them.
So really, it's just about people. It's ideological, really, isn't it? I mean, it's like down the middle. You either agree with me or you don't. And of course, Texas, in terms of conservative cases and issues and so on, it's very much to the right, isn't it? And it's quite a Republican state.
Very much so. And it'll be interesting to see how other states follow suit, because Texas could definitely become a model for places like Missouri, which has been battling this whole abortion fight. Florida, we'll see what happens.
Itoro, thanks very much indeed. Itoro Udofia, Arise correspondent there, talking to us about the fight over abortion rights in America. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja and around the world, and Itoro, who's here with me. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.